Warning: the episode you are about to listen to most likely contains graphic language, details of violence and murder, and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. What's up, everybody? Happy Thursday.
How's it going?
Welcome to Murder with My Mother, where I talk murder with my mother. We're just like a bit blah today, so super fun to listen to, I'm sure. Sorry, the weather is like gloomy and shitty, and it's the 2nd of November, and what day is it?
It's the 3rd, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah, the time change got me.
Although we're saying it's Thursday when we say Happy Thursday, everybody.
It's actually
Tuesday
that we record. So happy Thursday, Tuesday.
And I've been out in the rain all day at work.
Yeah, you guys don't know this, but my mom drives public transit, so she has a great day. She has a great day when...
It's been a draining day for sure.
Christina.
Anyway, so today we're going to give you guys the conclusion of Clifford Olson's crime spree and how he eventually got caught and then what happened to him after that. The last 4 victims, which we have 4 left to talk about, happened pretty quickly after the police kind of knew, well, they didn't know how many people he had killed, but they knew that they suspected him big time for at least 2 of them. And they were going to keep him under surveillance, but they didn't have the money or the time, apparently, to do so.
And they went to go try to find him, and his family was like, oh, yeah, they're on vacation down in
him and his
California,
baby.
And his new wife he just married while he was in the midst of killing all these children.
Yeah, they're actually at
Knott's Berry Farm having the time of their lives.
Yeah,
awesome. I don't know who brings a newborn to Knott's Berry Farm. Can't go on any rides. What a buzzkill.
I don't even know who goes to Knott's Berry Farm. Actually,
You've been to Knott's Berry Farm multiple times. Anyway, so Clifford came home on July 21st from his fun family vacation. And July 23rd, Raymond King Jr., who was 15 years old, was living in New Westminster and went down to what my mom says they used to call the manpower office. I didn't know what this was, but she's like, no, it's like I'm thinking it's like a career fair, but like...
Well, manpower, I think, is what they used to just call unemployment. Like the place, when you go now to the unemployment office, I don't know and you don't know, but there's a place at the unemployment office where jobs are listed on the wall.
Okay.
So that was called the manpower office back in those days, and this was a youth employment.
The youth one? Okay.
Yeah.
And so he went to go down there to try to find a job because there wasn't like Craigslist or all that.
Yeah, there was
go
no
to
cell
the
phones
physical.
even, nothing.
Yeah, so he went down on his bike, and his bike was found at the office, but he was not found.
Yeah, he was never seen again.
He went missing that day. So that was July 23rd. And like 2 days before that, Mr. Olson had returned back from his trip. So coincidence?
Well, he was probably just jonesing to kill someone.
Yeah, imagine waiting that long. And he was going like pretty...
Well, he made up for it because on the 25th, Judy Kozma's body was found, coincidentally. That is a coincidence. Her body was found, and that exact same day, there was an 18-year-old Swiss...
Ballin'. No,
there was
a Swiss
exchange student that was here on a tour from Switzerland with a group. The rest of her group went on a day cruise that day, and she decided she was going to go visit her cousin in Burnaby.
And she took the bus down there, right?
Yeah,
she kind of like planned her own way, found her way to her cousin's. And you'd think that if your cousin was coming all the way from another country, you'd be home, but her cousin, I guess, had something happen last minute, or she didn't know.
Or she just didn't be home.
Maybe, yeah, and she wasn't home. So Sigrun...
That kind of shit happened in the 80s.
Yeah.
Nobody really kept to a very good schedule.
Perfect.
And we all ran away.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm sure Mugga loved that last episode. Shout out to Mugga, our #1 fan.
Hey, Mugga. Mom. Sigrun.
Oh, and Grandpa. I'm sure Grandpa loved that too.
Yes, I'm sure. So Sigrun was last seen at a bus stop.
Yeah, so that was the same day that Judy Kozma's body was found.
Yes.
So 2 days after that, Terry Lynn Carson left her house at 8:30 in the morning, and she, like a lot of the other teens that summer, were out looking for a job. So she left the house early to get a head start and try to find a job, but her mother didn't see her again after that. So they reported her missing when she didn't come home later that evening.
And on the 29th, the police had been on and off surveilling Clifford Olson, but like I said, they didn't have the resources. They didn't really have a very good plan.
They didn't really have a fucking clue
No,
because it took them so long to put these together. Like this
they
blows.
didn't put them together.
No, I know, but I mean, when they finally
Yes.
do, and like I said last time, there's so many kids going missing, and this is not something that's just a common occurrence.
So on the 29th, they had followed him around. He was basically weaving in and out of traffic, and they were pretty sure that he had seen them, that they were following him. And
They just boom.
Yeah,
Called it
they
off.
said, you know what, this is not working. It's too hard. We have to regroup and come up with like a concrete plan. So they called off the surveillance.
The 30th, though, so that was the 29th that they called it off. But Detective Carr, who was one of the investigators, had an idea that if they met with Olson and they recorded a conversation of them essentially bribing him, offering him money for information, that they would kind of use this ruse to get him to say something.
And they also knew his ego would lead him to say something that would, he can't just be quiet. He just could not say like, I deny everything and be quiet. His ego was way too big for that. So on the 30th,
they met with him at like a diner or something.
White Spot, I think.
White Spot. He pulled up and they have him saying like, lot of homicides around here, huh? And he said to them, yeah, well, if I'm gonna give you any information, I want $3,000 a month, and I have information. I could get you information on these kids that are going missing.
And it's so crazy because 1981, $3,000 a month was like probably like $8,000 a month is now. Like that was a lot of money.
Well, we hadn't mentioned it, but he had previously had experience being an informant for the police. So that's actually, I think, how he got out of jail the last time he got out. He got out like, I think it was 2 months before he committed his first murder.
He got out in September and he killed Christine in November.
Yeah, and so he had gotten out early because he had provided information for the person that was in his cell with him, had told him a bunch of stuff, I think. And so
it was a child killer. And he had told him exactly where he had put all of his bodies and how he killed the kids. And Olson was just going to the police and repeating it. So
that's crazy that they wouldn't have linked that if they knew already that Olson was the one that was giving information about the crimes that he had, like that they wouldn't see that that was happening, that these kids were going missing, and then look and see that he just gave all this information on all these in-depth details of murder of kids, and wouldn't see that that maybe he would be a tie, like he's being a copycat.
Well, I think there was just a lot that was missed with this whole thing, and I think it was partially due to the fact that we didn't have the same technology, but also that it happened in a couple different jurisdictions and no one had their shit together. And so the day that they offered him the money, he left and no one followed him. He left the restaurant.
Yeah, willy-nilly, free from no tail, no one tailing him, no one surveilling him. Apparently, the police decided to think this was just coincidental, but that same day, Louise Chartrand left for her shift. She was from Maple Ridge, so she would hitchhike. She was known to hitchhike a lot. So she made
the club, Louise.
Yeah. So, well, you and every other person, like I said, in the 80s, 90s, and the 70s for sure. So she hitchhiked safely and made it to her destination.
Mission.
So she made it there, and then she was walking. She went to go get cigarettes. So the man that dropped her off and said, yeah, I dropped her off here. She went and she walked to go get cigarettes. And that night, coworkers had to call her family and say she never showed up for her 8 o'clock shift.
Yeah, so she didn't show up to work. And right away, the police had, this time, finally, knew that it was foul play and pretty much figured on who had caused it. So that was unfortunate because those 4 that we just kind of rattled off really quickly happened all within a matter
I
of,
think it's like 5 days.
yeah, it was 5 days, and they
Well,
could have all,
so Raymond King Jr. was on July
7 days, 1
23rd.
week.
Yeah, and then she was found, or sorry, she went missing on the 30th.
So, and that the saddest part about all of that is that he was a person of interest before that. Even those 4 people went missing or were murdered, or, like that could have all been very much prevented, and it was not.
So at this time, they had only found 4 of the bodies. So
Yeah.
4 bodies, and they didn't even link all of the 4 together at first. They thought it was different
The
people.
only 2 they had linked together were, I think they had linked Ada and Darren.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
And they were just found by people walking their dogs, as we cased last time. They weren't actually looking for bodies. They just happened to be in the same area
Yeah.
that they were
Walking
abducted
their
from.
dog.
And they knew that Clifford's father was a caretaker in that same area. So, and then he'd also stopped taking the girl to the arcade after he tried to sexually assault her.
Yeah, so
And
the
they caught
wheels
him.
finally started to turn 11 children later.
Yeah.
Yeah, pisses me off, but whatever. So what happened was they finally, after Luis went missing, like you said, they actually started to suspect that, okay, we think that this guy is responsible for more than we initially thought. So
maybe we'll actually surveil him.
So maybe we should actually start to follow him, because I'm sorry, I know that they say they don't have the manpower, they don't have the money. Sit one fucking person in a car and follow him around for their whole shift and do the same thing in the next shift and the next shift and the next shift. You're gonna pay someone to write tickets, you may as well pay someone to follow someone who you think is mutilating and killing and ending children's lives for no reason, for like pleasure and fun. So finally decided to come around and start surveilling him. And between August 6th and August 12th, they saw him do a couple B&Es.
Yeah, he was a multifunctional criminal.
Yeah, so he basically went in his tool belt of life and would kind of use whatever suited him in that moment. And because they were obviously looking at him for something way bigger than B&Es, like break and entry, they were looking at him for multiple murders and sexual assaults and like not even murders, like
well, they
horrible
thought
murders.
They only kind of had really linked at this point 3 or 4 together. They didn't realize how many murders he
No, but in comparison to a breaking and entering, they kind of left that alone, and they wanted to catch him doing something much more serious. So
he took the ferry to Nanaimo and drove to Ucluelet, which is by Port Alberni. He picked up 2 girls along the way somewhere.
Hitchhiking, probably.
Yeah. And the police were following him actually this time. So they saw him in the car with 2 young girls.
Probably panicked, and they're in danger, and now obviously putting all the pieces together.
Yeah.
Slowly and slowly.
So they pulled him over. I think they were actually stopped for a pee break or something, and the police approached them and took him out of the car, arrested him on the B&Es, which was good that they watched him do that because they had something to hold him on, and released the girls. That was those 2 girls.
Oh, God,
the luckiest day of their lives.
Holy.
They were like probably minutes away from being murdered.
Even though we know he didn't like to do 2 at once, remember? He would be like, oh, I don't have enough work for you. I'd have to drop you off and come back and get you. So.
Although, like, I mean, the frenzy of his killing, that's like...
He was ramping it up.
Yeah,
he was leveling up. So he probably would have just killed. He was probably
that's
what
I think. I mean, my personal opinion is he probably was going to kill both of them.
Yeah, and
so... like a test for himself.
Yeah, but... So what happened is, while they were searching his car, they found a green address book that belonged to Judy Cosma. So on August 25th, they had enough evidence, which I guess would have just been that book, because they say later that they didn't have any evidence.
Yeah, they charged him with Judy's murder, and then when they were interrogating him, I think it was kind of just a bluff, really, because the police say they didn't have one shred of evidence.
Yeah, so they were probably just trying to use everything that they could to make him believe that they had more evidence.
Well, and they also knew that he was a talker, so
yeah,
he would eventually just he would brag about shit.
His personality, it was very out there.
Yeah, totally. So while they were talking to him and they were going on about Judy's murder, he suggested, well, why don't I make a deal with you guys? It's a cash for bodies deal. So I'll give you for $10,000 for 10 bodies, so $100,000. And tell you what, I'll throw the 11th one in as a freebie.
So generous.
Yeah. So the police agreed to it. It had to be
Yeah.
even approved by the Minister of Justice.
Who I guess also agreed to it, which I don't know how I feel about that because he called his wife and like right away and was like, "Honey, you're gonna be rich." Like right away. Like that's
I think the one thing, like I thought the same thing, the one thing that kind of made me understand it a little bit more is if they didn't have any evidence, there would have been a risk that he could have walked
yeah.
without doing that. I mean, the whole province, actually the whole country and the whole continent that made big news on the
Yeah.
news. No one had ever paid money for people to come and like basically he told the stories of each person that he killed and he took them in person in a disguise wearing a police hat and no handcuffs to the location of each body. And each body that was found that he promised he was paid, his wife, Joan, was paid $10,000 for each body that he led them to.
And then they gave him 30,000 for the 4 bodies that were already found, but he just gave information.
Yes. So in total, it was 100,000.
Clifford, because of his deal, he obviously started to give information on each one of the children that, like we said, the ones that had been found already, whose bodies had been found probably by someone walking their dog or
Yep.
some other unfortunate circumstance, and the other ones where the families had absolutely no idea what had happened to their
The police
children.
had no idea.
No one knew. So Clifford was the only one that really had this information, and he was the only one that could provide, the location and the closure and everything that the families obviously were wanting. So he had taken Christine Weller from the animal hospital. He said that he saw her on her bike and he was parked in the parking lot of the animal hospital and he called her over and said, "Do you want a job?"
Yeah, well, I think that's what he used for pretty much every single person.
Yeah, it was basically always the same.
Teenagers want to make money. They want to have money to buy a car or buy smokes or buy, whatever, clothes.
Yeah.
Or he said that he had killed Christine. Well, he admitted to it because they'd already found her. She was stabbed and strangled. Then Colleen, he led them to her at 144th Street and 26th Avenue in Surrey. She was killed with multiple hammer blows to the occipital region, and she was killed with a head injury.
And Darren, they had already found his body as well in DeRoche, but he also had extensive damage to his occipital region and extensive trauma to his head from hammer blows as well. So the same thing with Sandra, and he led them to her body in the Chilliwack Lake area, and her cause of death was, like I said, also a head injury, an extensive head injury from blows from a hammer.
Ada Court, he led them to her, and there was four victims that were all in the same area of Weaver Lake. And the crazy thing about that, she was also killed by a hammer, but the weird thing about that is the killer that he had informed on in jail, that's where he liked to take all of his victims in the past, also was out by Weaver Lake.
And he had talked about that probably with like lust in his voice to Clifford because, you're boasting about your crimes.
Yeah.
He probably made it seem, well, clearly he made it seem like something that Clifford really wanted to emulate and do and follow in his footsteps because he did exactly these.
Well, that's such a remote area too.
Yeah, it clearly sparked something in Clifford's head to be like, wow, good idea.
I'm never going camping.
No, I've camped there before, and I'm not.
When you hear about everything that's happened, even Chilliwack Lake too. I've been up there lots also.
Even Newton, I don't even want to go there. I don't want to go to Wally. I don't want to go.
I was just there today.
Yeah.
Simon, the little guy that disappeared from Surrey, the 9-year-old boy on his bike, he was found in a remote area off River Road in Richmond, and he had been strangled.
It's strange to me because usually killers are always doing different crazy things, but usually they stick to one MO. They usually have one method of killing, one thing that they're more comfortable with. So it strikes me as weird that it's strange because it's very different that he either did, he killed with like a
The camera blows to the
hammering,
head.
exactly, like that's so aggressive. And then something like, they're both very personal, but something like strangling someone, you're taking your life away with with your hands.
Hmm.
You're draining life from their body with your own hands. So it's very personal. Whereas a hammer, yeah, I know that that's obviously going to be same thing, but you're using a tool, so it's kind of not as, it's almost like detached. When you're strangling
He
someone,
definitely, I mean, the way that he mixed it up too, like with the sex of the
oh, even the victims,
that's what I mean.
yeah.
Like the sexes of the victims, the
Yeah,
ages.
it's
Yeah, they were
all
all
over the
young, but it
place.
is all over the place. And
But if that almost makes me feel like he did it, I mean, I'm not saying he did them for shock value, but to know that he just sat there and listened to someone tell about his victims and where he did that and all this, it's like he built this up in his head that he was gonna do, like, like almost like
yeah,
he was
well,
gonna
he was
do
a
these,
bragger.
yeah, like he wanted to do them so he could brag.
So Judy was killed by multiple stab wounds. So there you go, different again. And she was also found out by Weaver Lake. Raymond King Jr.
He was also found out by Weaver Lake, but he
This
again,
was probably, I think, this one. I mean, I'm not saying one is worse than the other because they're all terrible,
no, but he
but
was like
he was
experimenting or
starting to
something.
experiment because he drove a large spike, like a large nail, into Raymond's head, threw him down an embankment, and then threw rocks on top of him while he was unconscious. So that's what killed him.
Yeah, because his cause of death wasn't the spike. It was actually head injury from the boulders that Clifford had thrown down on top of him after he threw him down there. So,
Sigrun, the exchange student, she was found near Simon on the remote area of River Road. They were only 400 meters apart from each other. And in one of the research papers that I read, it said that he had broken off a screwdriver into her head, and that still didn't kill her. So he was hitting her with a hammer, and then he put her in a ditch, and a ditch filled with water and covered her with stuff. But her cause of death was massive head injury.
it came out later that as he was raping Sigrun, he actually was doing it on River Road, which is really close to some train tracks. And so, was it people that worked on the train or was it passengers on the train?
Well, I've heard two different things. I heard one of them was the guy, like basically the conductor or the guy that's standing on the front to make sure, like the watchman or whatever, saw some people. A woman was kneeling and there was a man standing. I guess he was taking off his clothes. She was already naked. And he thought he had just witnessed a couple
Doing
having
it
consensual
outside,
sex.
yeah,
But it
just
turned out later when it all
embracing
came
their
out
freaky side, yeah,
that
but
he actually
witnessed a
saw,
murder,
yeah, he
yeah.
he witnessed the murder.
So obviously those people didn't know what they had seen, so that made a lot more sense when once her body was found in that area and people had heard that that's
Yeah.
what was really going on. I mean, that must have been horrible. Terry Lynn, her body was found. He brought them to Chilliwack, and her cause of death was strangulation. Clifford led the detectives to his last victim, who was Louise Chartrand, and he actually led them all the way up to Whistler, so a gravel pit in Whistler. And he said that the night that he had taken Louise, he stopped in Squamish.
He stopped with her in the car at the police station in Squamish to pick up his confiscated weapon, which they refused to give him because the officer wasn't on duty at the time. And then he carried on to Whistler, where he killed Louise in a gravel pit by multiple hammer blows to the head, and then he buried her in a shallow grave.
There's something that happens when you choose a life where something could happen to you, where you get involved with drugs or gangs or something like that. And even still, murder is always senseless. But when you're taking kids off the street and picking them at random, and
For your own essential pleasure.
you're sick sexual, you're killing these kids and you're doing it in all these experimental different, what way can I be more fucked up, like really you're just trying to be more evil and evil and evil. And almost seems like he obviously he couldn't control himself. He was doing it was almost every second day, like at the end he was murdering.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Well,
mean,
and the fact that he didn't have a job at the time and was just driving around all day in different rental cars over and over. His wife Joan said she had been previously married and she had like a $46,000 divorce settlement, and basically that's what he was using to fund his murder spree, was just driving around and around and around with different rental cars each time he killed someone for thousands. I think they said he'd put like 1,000 kilometers on his car, on whatever car he used a day.
Well, one of his nicknames is like the rent-a-car killer. Did you know
I haven't
that?
heard that one, but
Yeah.
that's very apt, actually.
Yeah. And so we haven't really touched much on Clifford. Obviously, if you're listening and you listen to the first episode, you've gathered that he's a huge evil piece of shit. The thing is, anyone that knew him always knew him as a bad seed. He basically was born bad.
Yeah.
And he was always in fights. He was always getting beat up. He was bullying. He even, I know that he got beat up so many times he took up boxing. I read so that his father did an interview years later that he took up boxing so that he could defend himself, so he could go back and repay all the kids that had beat him up. And I think he was only getting beat up because he was a mouthy little shithead and he was a loner and he kind of kept to himself.
He was annoying by all accounts. Anyone that knew him, he said he was just like, he didn't shut up and he was super, super annoying.
Yeah.
Just a know-it-all.
I know he was 15 when I think he failed for the first time and then had to redo that grade a bunch of times. I mean, if you're just constantly like the bad seed and you're distracted with doing all these bad things, you're not gonna be focusing on your studies. You're not gonna really get very far.
And he also, when he was little, was sexually molested by an uncle. So I guess being a bad seed, and then you add that kind of delinquency in, also you've been molested, that kind of was your introduction to sexual crime.
Well, and there's studies that show when something like that happens to somebody when they're young and they experience that that trauma, it actually creates different pathways in their brain.
Yeah.
For behavior, for ways that they deal with things, for ways that they process. And so take a kid that always kind of had problems with that anyway and add, sprinkle some of that in there. Yeah. And yeah, that's never going to make for a good ending to a story. But then he went to jail for the first time when he was 17 years old for breaking and entering. Like we had mentioned last time, he had a very vast list of
everything. Every single crime you can imagine.
Clifford Olson committed.
So he says himself that he, in the past, he started victimizing other kids when he was around 10 years old. He would take kids into the bushes and sexually touch them, stuff like that. He also was reported to have raped a fellow inmate that was much younger than him with a bunch of other guys. He says that he's had sex with very, very, very many children when he was in and out of jail, so for years and years. And he said the only reason he started killing kids was because he didn't want to get caught. So whether or not he was just talking shit at that point, who knows?
Maybe just don't molest kids and then you won't get caught for anything.
Yeah.
Or don't break and enter. Don't drink and drive. Don't do all those
drinking
things.
And driving back in those days didn't even really get you much trouble.
No, it didn't. But, when you're doing things that put other people's lives in risk, obviously how many lives it's taken since the 80s, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's so serious
exactly
now.
Yeah, because back then, I'm sure there wasn't a whole lot. I'm sure shit happened, but there wasn't a whole lot of data to use to compound to
computers.
Say, yeah, okay, wow, maybe we should make this illegal. I mean, it didn't take them very long to make cell phones illegal while you talk on to talk on the phone and drive. That didn't take very long, but the alcohol and cars, they were around for a long time before those laws came out. So. Yeah. In January of 1982, Clifford pled guilty, and he was sentenced that same month. The judge was quoted saying, "My considered opinion is that you should never be granted parole for the remainder of your days. It would be foolhardy to let you at large." Well, at least someone was fucking awake.
Yeah, at least.
Because the fact that it took them so long to catch him is so nerve-wracking and so makes me so mad. So because we used to have something in Canada called the faint hope clause, which was stupid, and so many people used it as a loophole to get out of jail earlier.
It was the most
serial killer friendly thing.
Yeah, it was. But it was the most serious of crimes. People that were convicted to over 25 years for first degree murder, were able to apply for an early parole after 15 years under the faint hope clause.
The faint hope that they had changed. But the fact that it was even called a faint hope, like,
Yeah.
wouldn't you think that that is like a fucking bad idea?
Well, I don't know like why really it was even invented, but it really
Anyway.
put the families through torture because
Yeah, because they would have to come up for parole over and over and
yeah. And
over.
Clifford, being the fuckhead that he was, and like the little nitpicking bastard.
Well, he would send the families letters and say, "Hey, if you want more information."
Yeah, here's part of what I did to your family member. But if you send me a picture of yourself having sex with an animal, I'll give you more information.
Yeah, because someone's gonna quickly just snap that photo
Yeah.
to get information from your
Some
lying psycho ass.
some of the families actually complied with some of the things, like obviously not the outlandish have sex with an animal things, but some of the families were so desperate to get more information that they complied with some of his requests, and he would immediately send them back a letter saying, haha, tricked you.
Because he was a piece of shit.
Yeah, he was he was a psychopath, and on the psychopathy score, he scored 38 out of 40 for being a psychopath, the most out of anyone I've ever
Read about?
yeah,
Yeah, I
read
was
about.
reading. I know. I noticed that too. And so after he pled guilty to the 11 counts of murder, he was given all concurrent life sentences, and he was gonna serve those sentences in one of our super maximum security. It's the special handling unit in the Saint Anne de Plains, Quebec, which I think a lot of our big time dangerous offenders are housed in there.
Well, especially the ones that have anything to do with child murder or child rape, because obviously inmates can't be in a general population because the other inmates will take care of them for everyone. That people that do anything to children are not going to last very long in the gen pop.
Yeah, I know we've talked about that prison
Yeah, prison code.
prison code. So while he was in prison, he said a lot of weird shit too. Because he was the kind of guy, like, he couldn't just sit there and be quiet. He needed people to be paying
Yeah.
attention to him.
He
And
was a fame seeker.
yeah, and it was mostly for like outlandish, like super crazy shit that nobody really believed. I mean, okay, if you're gonna come up and say, okay, I murdered 11 kids and that was all true and found to be true, like, you probably would take him seriously for a little bit at first, but he's in there for years, and like I said, he's just gonna keep coming at you with weird
His
stories.
star starts to fade, and then he has to make more shit up. So didn't you say that he actually, some kids got to talk to him in jail?
Yeah, I was looking as I was researching this. There was some weird video on YouTube, and you can tell I don't know if these kids were from Canada, but they were from somewhere. They sounded like they almost had an American accent. But the video on YouTube, they called Clifford Olson and they're having this conversation with him, and they're trying to get him to say stuff, but it's not hard. Like, he's talking about it, and at one point they're saying to him, Clifford, we know you didn't do it. We believe you, Clifford. And he's like, what are you guys talking about? Like, for sure I did it. I don't know what you guys are talking about. I admitted all of this. Like,
Yeah.
you guys,
And
what are you guys smoking? I'm pretty sure he said. Yeah.
Brought the police to all the bodies.
Yeah. But there was some other controversy in March of 2010 because the media disclosed that Olson was receiving his federal government benefits from Canada while he was in prison, and he was getting almost, I think, like set $1,200 a month. And I mean, obviously he was contributing to his pension, but I think there's that controversy where, okay, he has killed 11 children,
and he's in jail.
He shouldn't be getting his old age pension.
You really don't need to get your pension, like that much money every month. It was actually his it wasn't his old age pension. He was going to receive that on top of the money that he was getting.
Yeah, the guaranteed income supplement.
Yeah, so he was going to be getting both soon, but they put a kibosh on that once it came out that he was even getting that, and then the government looked into abolishing that until people got out of jail.
Yeah, and then I know that in September of 2011, it came out that Olson had terminal cancer and that he had been transferred to one of the hospitals in Laval. And
Quebec.
Yes, and I know that I read a lot of different interviews with all the families that were willing to talk about it, the victims' families. And I know I read an interview with Judy Cosma's brother, and he had said that once he heard the news that he was dying and he was terminal, that it brought him almost like a peace.
Yeah, I read a lot of the parents were crying in happiness basically, because you have to think when the faint hope clause came, they had to see him and hear about him every 2 years for quite a while.
Well, I didn't tell you this yet, but one of my coworkers, his mom was on the parole board.
What?
Yeah, for Clifford Olson's case, and said that she did it all the time. That was her job. But he would come up and she would say, he's never going to get out.
No.
But the fact that he puts these families through it, it's like that last control and that
Yeah.
torture that he is subjecting these families to, because now he's like
Totally
this
what it
little
was all
raisin,
about.
right? He's like this crazy little raisin that lives in somewhere, and like I had said, I didn't even know the notoriety, how infamous he was. I didn't know until I researched it. So I can take a guess and say that not a lot of people know who he is in the newer generations, because his name has kind of been forgotten for good reason. But at the same time, he thrived on people knowing who he was. So he held on to that until the end of September in 2011. So he died on September 30th, and he was 71 at the time of his death.
Ugh,
He died too young, honestly. He died too young. He should have. I hope, because it just came out in the beginning of September in 2011 that he had the cancer, and he died at the end of the month. So I'm hoping that it was a really aggressive form that really like tortured him on the way out, honestly. I don't wish that on anybody, but this guy was the most, like, the biggest evil
POS.
devil piece of shit ever on the planet. So this case, we know that where we live, the people that do remember this happening and the people that were affected, like I've had some people reach out to me and say, hey, I went to school with this victim, and I remember how this affected my community, and I remember how this affected kids they went to school with.
Working on this case has been very, very draining. Like, you don't even notice you're going through the research and looking at all the kids' lives and what bright little lights they were, and then their murders and where their bodies were, and his fucking personality even just like drains the life out of me. But it was definitely very draining and quite depressing just to research it. So I can't imagine living through being a family member of one of the people, and it happening so quickly and so close together.
Well, and then over and over, once you find out and you can put a name to who this evil person is, that you find out that he actually is evil, and he takes that light and dims it for their own evil, sick, twisted pleasure.
Yeah.
So loves to torture people, because most people, when they get caught for something like this, it's like, oh my God, I would have never expected. Wow. He like, there's very quiet. If you see videos of Jeffrey Dahmer in court, he literally kept his head down most of the time. People like that, like,
but they all killed for different reasons.
Exactly.
I guess.
But
I mean, Clifford killed for very selfish. Everything about it was selfish.
Yeah. And
I mean, every
killer's selfish. But then you get to like I said, where he had no actual victim type. He had nothing that there was a mold that you had to fit this, and then he was, it was literally circumstantial. If he had in the moment the ability to do it, he was going to do it. If he could get away with it for that.
The only type he really had, and I heard from one of the kids that survived him asking them to get him to get in a car, was he always chose the weakest, smallest, youngest looking kid. So he knew, like, because he wasn't
that's a
very
projection,
big himself,
right? Because he knew he was weak and little, and he wasn't a very big man.
Well, yeah. So if you got like a big kid like Alex in the car, you're gonna try to do something.
It's my 6'5" brother,
but they're gonna beat the shit out of you, and
yeah. And if you stick to just the little ones that you have more control over, it would make it a lot smoother, I guess. But that was the case of Clifford Olson, the Beast of BC, which he called himself.
Yep.
That is a self-proclaimed beast. And usually the names that come out for these guys, they're very fitting, but this one's probably got to be, you hear of a boogeyman, you hear of like the beasts hiding, and this guy was really hiding in plain sight. Everybody everyone that knew him and found out after this happened, nobody I think was surprised.
Well, that's what I was just gonna say. He wasn't hiding in plain sight.
He was
People
in plain
people were
sight.
just blind because
Yeah.
they could literally find so many kids all over the lower mainland that have been like, oh yeah, that guy, you mean the guy that drives up and tries to get you to work
In
and
all the different rental cars, it was
yeah,
super
like
creepy.
everyone knew about him.
Yeah.
So he was in plain sight and
The police just didn't. They
yeah,
had their fucking blind.
blind
The fuck. Oh.
invisibility cloak.
Yeah. No. They like. I don't even. To talk about the police not putting things together, that comes up in cases sometimes where, again, being 100 kilometers away from the other.
Look at the Picton case.
Yeah.
That was another big.
That
one was
is
even
another. Yeah. So I guess what we are trying to say is the police, the lower mainland,
in 1981.
in 1980, and like you said in the Picton case, that's like that was in like 2000.
I think we should just leave that right here.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I have respect for the police and
I do
whatever.
too, but that's what comes up in this case.
It was just circumstantial at that time, and it was terrible at that time that no one put two and two together. Maybe it was just an age of innocence. I don't really know, but to me it seems like a lot of people lost their lives when it could have been prevented, and I wish that it had been prevented. So next week, as we said, we are going to now start going to every second week. So it'll be Danika's turn to research an episode for 2 weeks from now. And I can't wait to see what she has for us.
Yes, so that will be the 19th. So we won't be releasing an episode on November 12th, but we will talk to you guys on the 19th. And I will be back to talk murder with my mother.
Bye, guys.
See you later.